about Himalayan balsam. So I did my PhD studies on Himalayan balsam about 10 years ago, and it's been very interesting to catch up with the field of invasive species and see what the latest is about Himalayan balsam. And I wanted to share some of that with you this evening, as well as a bit of a background. So I'm going to sorry, I'm just trying to get my slides to catch up with me. Can you see the next slide? No, let me try again. Oh, no, that's not going to work. Sorry. There we go. Right, sorry, computers being a bit slow. Um, so Himalayan balsam is also known as many, well, from as many other different names as well. So Impatiens glandulifera is its Latin name, but it's also called poor man's orchid, policeman's helmet, jumping jacks, ornamental jewelweed, Indian balsam. There's a whole host of different names. It's listed under Schedule 9 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. So what that means, in effect, is that it's illegal to cause it to grow in the wild. So how do we identify it? Well, it's a pretty easy to identify plant, and I'm sure many of you will have recognized it. Its flowers tend to be purple, but they can range from pink through to white. But purple on the right hand side of the screen there in that picture, that's the most typical colour that you'd see it in. And it forms these dense, tall stands. It has red, hollow stems, very shallow roots, and explosive seed pods that are very distinctive. The leaves have got serrated edges, toothed edges to them, and they're elongated. So when it's not in flower, we can also recognize it by its distinctive leaves as well. Now, there's very few species that are anything like Himalayan balsam, but at a glance, some people do find it similar to rosebay willow herb, which is pictured here. Rosebay willow herb occupies similar kind of habitats quite often where it's been disturbed and it forms these dense stands as well. And it's got a very similar colour flower to it. However, the structure of the flower is very different, as is the structure of the leaves too, and the size and dominance of the species isn't quite the same as Himalayan balsam. It's a lot more of a delicate plant in comparison. Now, before it flowers, it's still recognizable from the seedlings. So these are very early emerged, um, germinates usually around February, March, and it's an annual species. And the seedlings have got a pink tinge. You can see this kind of reddish pink tinge to the middle there in that picture. And on the edge of the leaves, there's a notch that you might be able to see there as kind of wavy edge to the leaf. Now, the flowering time does vary depending on where you are in the UK, but approximately it begins flowering June, July, and that will go right through until September, October, when it gets killed off by the frosts. So this map shows its range. So in green, that's its native range around the Himalaya region. And in red, that's where it's currently known. That's its non-native range. And this is where it's invasive and highly problematic in these areas. And it's spread to over 30 countries during the past century. So it's made a huge march across the world globally. And I think that this may be underrepresentative of where it's actually found. We may just have fewer records in some of these other places. Now, I wanted to do a bit of research into its native distribution and how it appears in its native Himalayas. And there was very few pictures or information that I could turn up online. I found this one photo that was taken in its native range. It's generally temperate, humid conditions, and it's usually found at fairly high altitude. It can withstand really cold temperatures, so it's got no problem surviving our mild, wet winters. It's primarily bumblebee pollinated, and this photo illustrates that beautifully. You can see just how well adapted it is to hold that bumblebee, to get that bumblebee's pollen on its back, to then transfer that over to another plant. Other insect visitors include honeybees, social wasps, moths, fairies, flies, such as hoverflies. And a familiar sight to you if you've been around Himalayan balsam is that these insects emerge like ghosts. They're just completely dusted with white pollen. And in the UK, generally we find Himalayan balsam in damp habitats. So that's along waterways most often, but also in woodland and even ruderal habitats. And what I mean by a ruderal habitat is an area that's got disturbed soil. So it's colonized by early pioneer plants that can get in there really quickly. So that could be things like construction sites or even roadsides. So I thought it was important to define what we mean by some of the terms that get thrown around. So non-native, invasive species, alien species. So plants and animals are considered to be part of a larger ecosystem, and an ecosystem implies an evolution of balance between prey and predators. When we unintentionally introduce a species into a new environment, that can significantly alter the ecosystem and throw things out. The uncontrolled spread of a species is invasive, and these invasives kind of affect the ecosystem, and usually that's a negative effect. So, if we look closer to home about its spread across the UK, so it's been in the country since 1839 when it was first brought over to Kew Gardens as an interesting specimen. And ever since, it's spread along waterways and corridors of land. So that could be, say, along railway lines, for example. There's been a lot of deliberate planting in gardens and escapes from those gardens that's led to this explosion outwards. Now, this wasn't immediate by any means. There's often with invasive alien species a lag phase. Now, this lag phase is a period where it's dormant. There's an inactive period after they've been introduced before they expand. So this can be due to low initial numbers or a bit of time needed to adapt to new conditions. But change drives further change and it can hit this exponential increase. Um, it can be the long-term effects of repeated introductions as well. So this is the current picture you can see on the right there, this distribution map that I made using data that's available on the NBN Atlas. And you can see that it's kind of ramped all the way up there to Scotland and everywhere in between. So why is it so invasive? Well, it can produce up to 2,000 seeds in a single plant. Around 500 to 800 seeds is more typical, but it's a phenomenal number of seeds per plant. And it can fire them up to 7 meters. And this photo, I think, is beautifully captured that explosive seed capsule that you can see in the middle there, that curls up and pings those seeds up in every direction. So up to 7 meters, so quite some considerable distance. It replenishes its nectar faster than any native species. So bees and other insects are guaranteed a hit of nectar essentially when they come to visit that flower. So it's very attractive to pollinators. It produces huge quantities of pollen, so it really hedges its bets. To get pollinated, it produces a ton of pollen. And outside of its native range, it doesn't have any natural enemies. So it hasn't got anything keeping it in check. It's also very quick to establish on disturbed ground. It's a bit of a machine, really. I think it's quite an amazing feat of nature how it manages to spread so much. So, what's the problem? Why does it matter? Well, it's a huge threat to biodiversity. It competes for light, space, and nutrients, and it can reduce native plant species diversity. So in this photo here, you can see if you look at the level of the ground there, there's not much else growing there. It's all Himalayan balsam. And that's largely due to shading out. So particularly light dependent species, it has a strong competitive edge against them. It also can decrease insect abundance and diversity. So the not every insect is adapted to go to the flower. It doesn't necessarily have the right rewards. It might be unpalatable, but it also this reduction in insect abundance and diversity reflects the reduction in the plant diversity. Um, the element that I studied in my PhD was about competition with native plants for pollinators. So basically, it's more rewarding than the native plants. So those insects that you can see pictured here visit balsam rather than those native plants. It's important to note that although it does provide a role potentially in providing food for pollinators, it's supporting a very small range of pollinating insects compared to a more diverse plant community. So another threat to biodiversity, which we don't necessarily think of straight off, but it has been shown to deplete soil fungi. Um, although it is a mixed picture in this area of research, overall there is a more negative effect than positive. And fungi is important for all sorts of reasons, such as soil health, and decomposition, and a whole host of other processes. Something that also needs to be considered when it comes to Himalayan balsam is the erosion of riverbanks. Now, because it's got such shallow roots and it dies back in the autumn, it leaves that bare soil exposed. So as the river raises with increased water, increased rainfall over the winter period, it then can erode that riverbank substantially. Um, it can also cause an increase in flooding following its dieback. And as you can see from that photo, that dense stand of balsam, that's going to die back in the autumn, and all those nutrients are going to go into the water, so it can cause eutrophication from the decomposition of the stems. And another factor is that the structure of the vegetation around the river changes, and it becomes unsuitable for a whole host of other biodiversity, such as nesting waterfowl. So we should really think of it in a balanced way. Are there any benefits to Himalayan balsam? So you could argue potentially it's not as bad as some other invasives, such as Japanese knotweed, which doesn't provide any food for pollinators. Um, it does, as I said, it does provide some food for pollinators, but and it also has a long flowering season when little else is in flower. So if you think back to that earlier slide, I mentioned that it flowers until September, October. Many of our wildflower species that are native have gone over by then. Um, there's some really interesting research that it's got potential for bioenergy and also that it's rich in bioactive chemicals. So there's some research going on at the moment into how we could isolate some of these chemicals for treatment for anti-cancer, antidepressant, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial drugs. So is there any natural control? Now, it's occasionally eaten by sheep and cattle, but not enough to really make an impact on its spread. It does host two species of aphids and some leaf miners, and it is the food plant of the elephant hawk moth. However, we need quite a lot of those to make any significant change to the amount of Himalayan balsam that we see. There is a rust fungus that is used as a biological control agent, and this was released in the UK in 2014, and then again, a second strain was released a few years later in 2017. It can help control the growth without having negative impacts on the wider environment because it's very plant specific. However, a few populations have shown some resistance, so it's not the kind of silver bullet that we might be hoping for. So something that I wanted to touch on was about what you do after you remove Himalayan balsam. So some considerations that we need to make are, sorry, I've just got a pop up, make that go away. Sorry about that. Um, so it does raise the question about habitat restoration. Should we plant anything once we've removed Himalayan balsam? And if we do, then it provides some, excuse me, resilience against reinvasion, against erosion, and provides some replacement food for pollinators. However, it's important to note that there are restrictions around planting on riverbanks. So any works between 8 and 10 metres of a main river, 10 metres squared, sorry, of a main river, um, so that includes any kind of planting, requires permission from the Environment Agency. So do keep that in mind if that's something that you're considering. Um, sorry, there was one other thing I'm just noticing, keeping track on time that we don't go over. Um, it's also important to recognise that you may see some reinvasion from the seed bank. So where there's a number of seeds still present that germinate later. So it's thought the seeds are viable for 2 years, though I suspect probably for longer. But flooding can really vary how much reinvasion you see because you could get seeds from the bottom of the river coming up and being deposited on the riverbank. So to prevent the spread of invasive species, if you are working along riverbanks, please do remember the check, clean, dry. So what this means is these are three things that you should always do before you leave a waterway. Even if you're moving to another spot on the same stretch, just a few miles away, it's important to check your clothing, tools, or equipment if they've come into contact with the water or mud nearby. Clean your clothing, tools, or equipment, and dry everything completely. So, preferably that be in the sun, leaving no damp patches. So, this is not just about Himalayan balsam, it's about all sorts of other invasives that. Excuse me, that might be difficult to see. And note, of course, that seeds from balsam can get stuck in the tread of muddy boots. If you're interested in finding out a bit more, then the Flora Locale advisory note about planting near watercourses is very useful. So it suggests a few species that might be relevant, but it's really important to check what's there locally before you put anything in. And of course, consult the Environment Agency before you begin anything. And then just finally, if my computer will catch up, there we go. There are a few papers that I have asked Hetty to pop in the chat that you might find interesting. So if you're into the science of it and you want to know a little bit more about what I've spoken about this evening, then there are just a few research papers there. Most of them are open access. There's one that's you can only see the abstract of if you haven't got a subscription, but there's some really interesting points of view in those papers. So that's it from me. What I'd like to do next is hand you over to Mish. So Mish is from Escott in East Devon, and he's going to give us a community case study and some practical steps. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if I can. Oh dear, now I've got to find my floating controls that I asked it to hide, Hetty.
No problem. If you want to get that one back up, Kathy, and just whilst we do, I've just put a poll, which I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about whether you are. Oh, that's the wrong poll. Bear with me. Sorry, I meant to put on, in fact, this one. Sorry about that. Which you hopefully it'll pop up for you now. As I said, you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but it's just an interest in whether you're currently taking any action to tackle Himalayan balsam in your community. So there's a few options there for you. I'll just give it a minute for everyone to have a chance to vote. Great, I think probably most people have, so I'll end that and share results. So as you can see, yeah, most people are already taking some action. Some people are keen and ready, which is always great. And there's a few people not necessarily planning to, but hopefully this will inspire you, or maybe you're here just to learn more, which is great. So thank you for sharing that, and I'll hand over to Mish.
Thanks, Hetty. So I've been asked to give a case study of what we do in the River Tail. River Tail is a main tributary of the Otter in East Devon. And back in, well, when the new dual carriageway, I call it new, the dual carriageway, the A30, came through the park, Escott Park in the late 1990s, we wanted to do something to combat that environmentally. We couldn't stop the road or alter its course, but the amount of silt and rubbish that was going down the river when it was being built fired myself and a few others into creating the Tail Valley Trust, which is a registered charity. One of the first things that we did was to fence off about 7 miles of the river from cattle and stock getting into the water, and farmers came on board with that. We provided the materials, they did the labour. We left cattle crossing areas and drinking areas, but otherwise the cattle were excluded. Then the next thing we did was to want to reintroduce water voles to the river, and for that we had to make sure that there were no mink. So we spent 2 years monitoring and trapping any mink to a point where Derek Gow, who many of you will know or have heard of, felt it was safe to introduce water voles along the river tail. And that's when we discovered that our beautiful river was growing balsam. It was probably 2004 now when we really realized that from never having seen balsam before, we were now seeing it in more and more places. And at that point, I thought, well, let's start some groups, group sessions in the summer to get rid of it. I didn't know really anything about balsam or how invasive it was or how much it would be more there the following year if we didn't do anything. But we learnt as we went along. And long story short, we now cover the 8 miles from it's not the whole river, but the top end is fairly treed and shaded, and so actually there's not much balsam up there. But where it starts to open out, we do 8 miles from there to the confluence in a day with a number of volunteers, up to about 20 volunteers. Not everybody does the whole 8 miles, but we split up and I drop people off along the way in pairs and trios to work the entire length. So why is the Tail Valley important? Well, we sit just outside the Blackdown Hills area. We sit just outside the top end of the tail. The headwaters are just in the national landscape. Used to be called the AO&B, now East Devon National Landscape, and so difficult to get grants. However, we have been a lot of the sections have been recognised as county wildlife sites, and here at Escott Park, quite a lot of the ground is being surveyed for county wildlife sites, CWS, so getting grants is not that simple because of not being in those main areas. But it doesn't need huge amounts of money, and I quickly discovered that the parish councils could be tapped up for a bit of money, just sort of £250 a year from the various parishes, of which we've got several. We've got Fennerton, we've got Tallerton, we've got Broadhembury, we've got Payhembury, and technically we've got some of Ottery as well. Or rather, we're in some of Ottery. So all of those parishes are supportive, and really the costs for us are getting around on the days with fuel, which is not insignificant this year, but to take a vehicle or two to drop off and pick up volunteers. Then in our case, we use chest waders. They are expensive. They're over £100 a pair, and I repair them as much as I can. The biggest killer of waders is climbing over barbed wire or under barbed wire when you're trying to get in or out of the river. And the other tool that I introduced in the last 5 years is a hand slasher, little mattock, if you like, which isn't for slashing balsam, but it's for getting to the balsam, because the solid stands that you saw just now are when it has really taken over. But when you're trying to get to the plant or the couple of plants that have just established themselves on top of a bank, in amongst usually either deep nettles or deep bramble, you've got to be fairly dedicated to get to those. You think, oh well, it's only one or two plants, I'll go on by, but as you've just heard, each one of those is giving you usually about up to 800 seeds if you don't, and that the next year that patch of brambles will be just smothered in balsam. So the little slashers are useful to get to that one piece. Now, what do we do with it? Well, the tail is quite deeply cut as a river. In a lot of places, I mean, it does even out in other places, but mostly if you're working in the river, which we do, you're working below steep sides, and you're having to throw the balsam out of the river into the adjacent field. It's not toxic in any way, neither to humans. You won't get a rash from it, like you might with giant hogweed. And equally, it's not harmful in any way to cattle. They're not really that interested in it. They'll come over out of inquisitiveness and chomp on a bit, but it's a bit like eating a massive basketful of celery. It's really just full of water. So there's no real nutrition in it for animals. Some people actually make honey out of the flowers. It does make honey, but it's got a funny taste as far as I'm concerned. It's got a weird smell, the stalks and the flowers, and that translates into the honey. But everyone to their own taste. So we throw it out where we can, but when the banks are too steep, we hold on to it and have a sort of mini armful and walk downstream or upstream until you can get it out onto the banks. The worst thing you can do is to throw it up onto a steep bank that you can't reach the field, and you throw it up onto the brambles, and then you're literally spreading the seed for next year into an inaccessible area. Making piles of it on areas that are flatter is fine as long as they're above the flood line, because even in summer, as we know, especially with climate change, water is the river levels can come up, and if you've made a pile that's 3, 4, 5 meters away from the river but still pretty much at that level, the river can wet that plant, that heap, even if it doesn't take it away. And I mean, we walk the river once a month, June, July, and actually twice in August, so 4 times. And if you've left a pile and it's at all moist, or even if it's rained heavily during that time and the river hasn't got to it, there are plants growing out of that heap. They use the heap as their own compost and start growing out of it. So you either snap by hand or chop off with the slasher the root, and then you make your pile. But the root, as I say, if it's moist, off it goes again. It's an amazingly surviving plant. So how did we get to having 20 plus volunteers? Well, literally word of mouth to start with. The parish magazines are very helpful. We in the past had adverts with not adverts, articles with the parish magazines, which they'll do for free. And these days we've discovered that the parish magazines, which are obviously distributed by volunteers, will actually take flyers as well with the parish magazines either for free or for a small contribution to their distribution network. But recently, with the sort of awareness of the environment, we've been getting more corporate volunteers, so accountants from Exeter, legal volunteers, financial services, that sort of firm. And those sort of slightly larger firms, there's a government scheme that offers volunteering days which are paid. So as an accountant, or sorry, as an employee, you can go on a day's volunteering of pulling balsam and still get your daily your salary. So you're not actually having to take a day's holiday to do that, which is great. So we get groups of 10 or 12 from individual firms that have now been coming for up to 5 years, I think, each year, because they're not losing any pay. And where are we hoping to go from here? Well, at the moment, we're hoping to get more and more farms involved, not just in the balsam, but in the whole soils and health of the soils, and not fertilizers into the river, and generally the state of the river itself, by creating a farm cluster in the Tail Valley, or a farm collaboration. The government, in their wisdom, announced earlier in the year, which you may have seen, they're giving £30 million to just that, farmer collaboration. But when they announced it, they didn't tell you that actually 2026 is a consultation year, and there's unlikely to be any money to anybody this year. There might be a trial plot at the end of the year, but basically they're looking at least at 2027, by which time they might have even changed their minds. But that apart, the Tail Valley Trust it has other sources of funding, and we fundraise, so we are able to do a little bit of our own event presentations and so on. We did an evening earlier this year for up to 40 farmers in February, I think it was, which was quite remarkable to get 40 farmers on a February evening to come and listen to soil improvements and dung beetles and so on. So that's where we hope to be going. And all the farmers are very, very much on board. Often, we're asked, oh, well, don't you have to get continual permissions and so on? Well, no, we asked originally, and everybody said, well, most people said, I don't know what that is, but if it's not supposed to be there, help yourself and take it away. You're doing me a favor. And we hardly ever, if ever at all, see a farmer on their land, because we're down in the cutting of the river. And it's very rare that we sort of pop our heads up above the parapet. You might see this strange plant flying out of the river onto your field, but that's about as far as it goes. So yeah, that's it. I mean, it's not easy to start a new group from scratch, but it doesn't need huge resources. As I said, it needs constant. It needs a person or a few people to be really keen and dedicated, and it's a slog. And of course, like any invasive species, whether it's grey squirrels or balsam, it's continuous. You're not going to clear it indefinitely until there isn't any more in the county. In your bit or on your river, the higher up the headwaters you can start, or the higher up the ditches, or the higher up the tributaries that you can start before thinking about tackling a main river, or the Exe or the Axe or the Otter or any of our other main rivers. Get to the ditches and the tributaries and the side streams first, because the seed otherwise will just keep pouring down. And also, you don't want to disillusion groups by saying, yes, this is our day's volunteering. Here's a patch that's twice the size of a tennis court. This is what we're going to be doing for the next 3 days. You want to, if possible, keep moving. I mean, you do come across these big patches, but snipe at it. Don't disillusion people by trying to do it all in once, even if it's over 1 or 2 days. Take people on it for a few hours and then move on. Let them see something else. Let them have the chance of seeing a kingfisher or a dipper or something in the river. rather than just saying, I don't feel I've really achieved anything today. I've just pulled thousands of plants, but we haven't moved. So that's it, really. Yeah, keep trying to keep all these waterways open.
Great. Thank you very much, Mish. So we'll move to the Q&A session now. So please, I can see a couple of coming through. Please do keep adding them. We've got a couple which we had by email as well. So I'll start with the first one, which was there are a couple of areas where we risk destabilizing the bank unless we can plant something in place of Himalayan balsam. Would you be able to advise us on the type of plant suitable for the banks of the brook? So I think Kathy kind of touched upon that one earlier, and I put the link in the chat to the planting along riverbanks. So is there anything you wanted to add to that, Kathy, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is, obviously you need to consult the Environment Agency, like I mentioned, but also consider that anything you put there needs to be native. So if you unintentionally introduce something that you think is innocuous, but years down the line it could have an impact, then you're creating a problem waiting in the wings there. So always choose something native. In terms of destabilizing the bank, again, talk to the Environment Agency. I think that's they'll often have lots of information about that stretch of river and access to other resources that they can share with you. So do use those contacts. If you're considering planting trees, that can be good for stabilizing the bank, but again, you will need permission for that.
I would say that certainly as we live in a county of spates and spate rivers, planting plants on the riverbank with climate change as it is and the storms that we're getting more and more of, you risk those being washed away or flooded out very quickly. If you've got the ability to put in some living willow stakes, and then plant behind those, you might have more chance. Literally, that's cutting lengths of stakes out of willow, and they just grow. Again, you need permission, but it gives you an area behind that to at least get something fairly deep rooted, and it doesn't have to be too exciting. I mean, things like nettles are they're not they're not the most exciting plant, but they are native and they do have a network of roots that have got more chance of holding on in a flood than many other shallow rooted things.
Yeah, absolutely. And something like nettle that's going to tolerate those high nutrient conditions as well, because there's a lot of plants that won't do well in those kind of conditions because they like lower nutrients. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Brilliant. So next question then. Our site isn't by a river, but it's in a field. Once we have cleared a section, what should we do with the pooled balsam? Do we pile it up and take it away, or any other suggested methods? There is too much. So, Mish, shall we come to you first? And then Kathy, if you've got anything to add.
Sorry, can you just say that again?
Yeah, of course. So it's essentially their site isn't by a river, it's in a field. So they're just wondering what to do with the pooled balsam because there's quite a lot, I think.
So I would still, in that situation, I would make the piles. I would make sure that the roots are snapped and you can make a proper dung pile out of that, but that's quite easy to revisit and check that nothing's growing out of it, and that will then rot down, and if something is emerging after a few weeks, it's easy enough to pull out or fork out or whatever. Yeah, the piles, as Kathy said, you want to be careful about what the nutrients are doing but if it's on a field, I mean, you can go to the trouble of loading it onto a cart and taking it off to a ginormous pile somewhere. But these areas are often so big that it's just not. You can spend so much time removing it that you're actually not spending the time pulling it.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Mish, that you should leave it in situ and have like a sacrificial site area for it. Um, that's partly because of the effort involved, and it could be better used elsewhere, like Mish suggested. But also, you risk spreading the seed as you transport it. And if you did want to take it off site, you'd need to have a special license, I think. The council would know more about it, but there are only certain, because it's an invasive species, there's only certain ways in which you can dispose of that, which I'm afraid I don't know the ins and outs of. But your council would know if you did need to take it off site. So just consider the siting of it in the field, that it's going to do the least damage. So if you've got I don't know what the field is like, but if it's rich in wildflowers, then you don't want any of that runoff to feed into that field. So if you can put it in a corner somewhere where there isn't much botanical interest, then that would be what I would suggest.
I would say that unfortunately, some council workers are not best informed about balsam themselves, and often they are key distributors of it to their tips and to their soil dumps. And even when they're ditching, they will ditch a ditch with balsam and put it up into the hedge. And then volunteers have got much harder job the following year to pull it out of that hedge and out of those brambles than they did by just walking along the ditch previously.
Okay.
So we'll move to the next question then. So we'll come back to you, maybe first, Mish, for this one, which is there a best time of year to remove the balsam? Should we wait until it's grown to a size that's easy to manage? So good question.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really want to be removing it right now with the little tiny seedlings that Kathy showed. I mean, that can be completely soul destroying, and also you're going to be missing them because you're just treading on them and just pushing them into the substrate. So I would have said that the first you want to catch the first volunteer day before they're flowering, or when they're just starting to think about flowering, which is, I mean, again, with global warming, it changes, but we find that, I mean, our first day this year is on the 9th of June, and it's always around them. And some years there's a few out in flower, and sometimes I struggle to find a demonstration plant for the briefing. But by the sound of it, this year there'll be plenty in flower because they're already, coming up as the seedlings were just shown. So then through the summer, but by the time you get to August, you should be really going over what you've already done, because if you're going to new areas by August, it's already seeding and popping, and then you're wasting your time pulling it up because it's an annual plant, as Kathy said. So yes, you can put a plastic bag over every single plant and grab those seeds and gently put them down or let them pop inside the bag and then do something with that. But that takes ages to do, and it's really just not effective at all. Unless it's in your own garden and you see a plant of balsam come up late and you want to get to it, absolutely fine. But as a group, I would say once they're starting to seed like that, you want to wait till the following year.
Do you want to add anything to that, Kathy, or happy with that?
Um, yeah, I think that was an excellent summary, and it's it's best to try and get them before they've started flowering, if you can. Obviously, it's harder to see them against camouflaged against green on green. But they do, although the literature says it can take 3 to 4 weeks from flowering to setting seed, it can be a lot quicker than that. So once they are in flower, the clock's ticking against you, really. So the earlier the better. And if you can do repeat visits to get the next tranche that comes up, then that's great as well. But obviously, it does depend entirely on what your resources are.
Great, thank you. And then we've got a related question to that, which is a group have been pulling balsam before it flowers. Can you burn it out at an earlier stage with a gas weed burner? So do you know anything about Mish? Do you have any experience with that?
I haven't got experience with using gas burners, but yeah, by all means. I mean, it's the same principle as gas burning weeds on your patio. Um, whether Whether it kills the root or not, I'm not sure, because although they've got a shallow root, as I said earlier, they're such a survival plant that if you've singed off the visible plant above soil, it's quite likely, and I would say, yeah, almost certain that that root is just going to say, well, here we go again, I'll throw up another one.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with that method either. But yes, it's such a machine of a plant. It can survive anything. But it would be a really interesting experiment, I think, if you wanted to do a patch, and you could let us know what you find out, because that could be something that other people can utilize if that is a good method. But I wouldn't know either, I'm afraid.
Thank you. So we've got another question, probably more for perhaps you and I, Kathy, which is there, so really helpful, thank you, especially hints on keeping volunteers engaged, Mish, and is there any guidance available or plan for skunk cabbage? I don't know if you know about anything that exists out there, Kathy. We don't have anything planned at the moment, but if that's something that you are interested in finding out more about, do get in touch with us at the Wilder Communities team, so wildercommunities at devonwildlifetrust.org. And if that's something that people are interested in, then we could certainly have a look at doing something around that. Do you know of anything about that, Kathy?
No, I don't know any active groups at the moment who are tackling that one. But yes, like you said, Hetty, if you want to get in touch with us, we can look into that for you, and see what's going on with that species. I know that one's quite a difficult one to tackle, but definitely another one that's important to get hold on. So yeah, do get in touch with us so we can follow that up for you.
You can spray skunk cabbage and indeed balsam, especially when it's small, with Roundup, which is a no-no glyphosate. But you can get permission. It is an approved aquatic herbicide, or to be used near water, obviously with permission. But if it's a huge stand of skunk cabbage or balsam, when it's very small, sometimes it's because there's nothing particularly under the balsam growing, because it's wiped out all the natives. You're not going to be harming any other plants. But there's a whole debate with using glyphosate, but I'm just putting it out there that is one. We have done it with skunk cabbage by digging individual plants, but that's in an area where we've found individual plants. So if you've got a whole stand of it, they're quite deep rooted. They're sort of like a parsnip root. So it's not the simplest thing to get out.
Great, thank you. So where we're coming to the end of time now, I will just read out the last question, and then we'll wrap up. So Mish, this is for you. Do you see a future when you are completely on top of the balsam, or do you think it's something you always need to do?
I wish. As I said in my talk, I mean, if every headwater was clear, then yes, I mean it can only reproduce by a plant that you haven't pulled, that is throwing out its 800 seeds, that's either coming down the river, or being brought there because somebody's tipping soil with seeds in it. So where is the final headwater, or where is the final ditch that is bringing the seed? On some river systems and tributaries, that's more obvious than others. On the river tail, as I say, we don't We don't go all the way up to Broad Henbury, which is where it rises below the airfield at Dunkeswell. But yeah, I mean, no, we just, by the end of August, we have a pretty model, clear river stretch of 8 miles, but it's, you know, it's there again the following spring. And I would just like to keep going with as many volunteers as we can and get it as low as possible, so that one of the nicest comments we had last year was from a fisherman who said, I can't think of anywhere else in Devon where I've fished that is this clear of balsam. And that was a really nice accolade to have.
Great, thank you very much. So we're pretty much there now. So I think I'll just quickly, Kathy, if you're happy to share the final slide, just so we can wrap up. And whilst Kathy's doing that, I will pop that poll back up. Can I relaunch it? Let's have a look. Relaunch the poll. So if you're happy to re-answer the question, we'd love to know if you found this session useful. It should have popped up on your screen now. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that one. And whilst you're answering that one, it might be just worth quickly saying, because we do sometimes get asked questions about whether you need permission to remove it from riverbanks and public land. So Mish, feel free to chip in, because obviously you've got a lot of practical experience of this, but I'd say often, yes, it does depend on land ownership. So private land, you'll need landowners' permission. Public land, so for example, council land, definitely check with your local authorities. And rivers and waterways, you might potentially even need consent from bodies like the Environment Agency or like local drainage boards and things. So definitely always check. And if you can, a good practice is to get written permission, inform kind of relevant authorities, and coordinate with any existing local projects if you can. Did you want to add anything to that, Mish, or does that cover it?
Yeah, nearly. I would say that sometimes that can be very, very frustrating, trying to find out who owners are. And sometimes it's easier if you've got your general, you're happy that the Environment Agency are on board, which they're often, very helpful on things like that. Most of the time, very helpful with things like that, because, you're doing them a favor, really. And similarly, councils. But again, getting to the right person in the council, sometimes it's worth, if you get to your allotted day of your first pull and you still have 3 or 4 landowners that you've no idea who they are, it's worth carrying on and waiting till somebody comes and says, you're on my land, and then you say, well, I'm really sorry, this is what we're doing, we're pulling out an invasive species, couldn't get hold of you, if you'd like us to leave, that's fine. And that's often saves days of trying to find out who actually the owner is.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So yeah, just going to wrap up now, really. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on the poll. It's great to see most of you are feeling a bit more able, inspired and confident to take action. We will share the recording and some links and things after the presentation, but just a huge thank you really to everyone who's joined us this evening. Hope it's been useful. I've just popped a link into the chat, which is a feedback form. So if you do get a spare 2 minutes, I know feedback forms are a bit dull, but we really value any feedback we can get. As I said, it helps us shape future sessions. And in terms of our team at the Wildlife Trust and how we work, we like to know what communities are doing, what they find useful, and it helps us to justify what sorts of resources and webinars and things that we run in the future. So that would be really useful if you can give us some feedback. We do have in our team as well, we run a quarterly newsletter, so you may or may not already be on that or be aware of it. I'll put a link in the chat now if you want to sign up to that. It's separate from the main Devon Wildlife Trust website. So we just feature all things community in there, from community stories, what other communities are doing in Devon. So really trying to to share the great things you're doing and spread some inspiration from across the county. We put things like training and funding opportunities that we're aware of, local events. So if you want to share anything you're doing, events or stories, do get in touch with us. Sort of resources, all things community essentially, and it's quarterly, so it's not all the time. So the link's there if you want to. But other than that, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I hope it's been useful, and have a good evening.